What are some of the greatest challenges that you faced on your entrepreneurial journey?
It was really hard for me to sign a commercial lease. I thought that signing a commercial lease was like renting an apartment. I was like, "Yeah, I'll just call the landlord and be like, I want to rent this." And they would just ask me for money and I would sign it. And that's not at all what it looks like. Renting a commercial property looks more similar to a mortgage transaction than it would to a apartment renting transaction as far as paperwork, risk, liability, terms, price. Is just a much larger transaction. So really grateful that I had a great job at the time when I was looking and I had W-2 income. So I was able to sign a very large commercial lease and we have a 5-year lease, which is a pretty big responsibility, right? And I also used to feel a lot more isolated and I was constantly asking ChatGPT and Reddit and Facebook about the smallest things. Like I felt like I couldn't make any decision at my business without asking people because if I just made it, then I would be wrong and I don't know what I'm doing. And that was actually true. That was not imposter syndrome. I didn't know what I was doing. But then I started finding out how to find out what works. And it looked like networking with other studio owners just for fun and information sharing out of my heart. But also, it looked like some paid consulting as well to get the real answers. And also, a lot of accountability was really important because you can, all the answers to what a lot of business owners' problems are accessible somewhere on the internet, especially with ChatGPT, right? But you can absorb that and be like, "Oh, for sure, I'm gonna implement that," and then move on. But when you're working with somebody that's holding you accountable, you can't move on until you fix that thing. And that's what gets the results people want, or at least that's what worked for me. But it was really, really difficult to feel like I was shouting in the void and I couldn't figure out how to get help. And then after I got a lot of help for a long time, is when I started to feel like I just knew how things worked in the big picture, especially with marketing and just what the business model of any yoga or Pilates studio looks like. That because I just knew how it worked, I didn't feel like I needed to ask a bunch of people. I just was able to know the answer based on how our systems worked.
What was the moment like that you knew it's like, hey, I've got this job. I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna open up my own aerial yoga studio.
I actually didn't have a last day or a last anything. I actually love my career that I went to school for. I'm a certified sign language interpreter. And I tried to hold on to that for a really long time. So I did get laid off from my main gig, which was the catalyst to open the studio. I remember I was teaching at a different studio and class started at 10 and I like double tapped my phone to make sure it was 10 and it was 10 and there was an email that said everyone's laid off like in 6 weeks. You got 6 weeks, you have no job. And I had a huge trip coming up too to Asia and I was going to be gone during the layoff too. And I was like, "Okay, I have no job," and I taught that whole class, and in my head, I was like, "I have to make a really big decision right now. Am I gonna keep working, or is this the sign that I should start looking for a lease?" I already had the business plan and a lot of ideas, but that was the catalyst of like, "I think I should do this." And then I did find ad hoc work in between the full-time job laying people off and opening the studio, which I kept until actually just the end of 2024. And I was doing medical interpreting, which is my favorite, and then a lot of community college courses, which is fun because I've interpreted a lot of business and law courses, and it's like you're auditing the class for free, and I have to interpret it, so I'm, like, double understanding it, and I get access to all the homework, so that was a huge plus. But I was interpreting at local community colleges and online universities, and then when the semester ended, I challenged myself to not pick up work in January and see how long I could go. And I just built the net because I previously was paying my personal expenses through my job while I had the studio, which I'm grateful that could do because that was a huge, huge benefit financially. But I just happened to naturally graduate from that after that assignment. And it was also when I was filing taxes for the first calendar year of the business. I had like all these 1099s from interpreting assignments. And there was only a couple bucks on each one of them, and it cost more money to file the paperwork half the time, and it took so much time on the accountant's end, and I was like, "I should just put all my eggs in one basket for a year, and I'll promise myself that If I need to go back to work after this year, that's okay, but I don't need to, which is great.
Where did sign language interpretation come from? Like, where did that originate from for you?
I just took it in high school, and a lot of people take it in high school and love it, and they don't end up continuing, but my program had a really good foundation for people to go from high school to community college to university, and I loved it. I still love it so much. It's actually an amazing job. I tell anyone I know that has, like, coming of age kids or nieces or nephews that are like, "We don't know what they're gonna do." I'm like, "Learn sign language," because I loved that job. So I'm not someone that's like, "I open my business because I don't wanna work." I loved working. I just love aerial yoga more.
What did you learn about the whole sign language and the whole community that you are interpreting for while you were doing that?
The deaf community is very unique, very unique. Um, Deaf people have a really strong community because they share a language, and that's why you hear deaf community a lot. You don't hear blind community very often because 2 blind people can interact and not know the other one's blind having a conversation, but 2 deaf people do not have a conversation without knowing the other one's deaf, if that makes sense, and deaf people have more shared lived experiences with other deaf people than they do of other types of disabilities or cultures, and when you're deaf, you cannot hear by definition. So that makes it difficult to connect with people that aren't open to being creative with how they communicate with you. So they are just more drawn to each other in that way. Just like you see people, we're in Orange County, we have pockets of the Vietnamese community that lives in areas that speaks Vietnamese predominantly, and even all the signs are in Vietnamese, like in Westminster. That's because language is directly tied to culture and they're with each other so much, they're assimilating, and then they end up having shared behaviors and shame values. And my bachelor's degree is actually in deaf culture specifically. So it's about deaf people socioeconomically. And then I have a separate certification in the interpreting part of it, which is just language, but they're very closely tied.
It's interesting because I know nowadays with technology, there's a few more ways that you can communicate. You could
Yeah.
pull your phone out of your pocket, you could type something up.
Yeah. Technology is
Uh,
huge for deaf
yeah,
people. Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, I would try to communicate with somebody who was hard of hearing, and I would have to write something down for them to read. And then they would either try to speak something to me or write something down to me. I never spoke sign language or understood how to like interpret it, but it's interesting to see the different barriers of communication and to be able to bridge that. It
Yeah.
just sounds like something very like interesting to where it's like you're making an impact on somebody's life.